Good. We've been at rehearsal for a little bit. We're getting ready to release a new single at the end of the week. So we're doing all the little things we have to do for that.
Oh, yeah. All the social media, the marketing.
Yeah, the press, the radio, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Never easy, is it?
No, like honestly, everyone thinks like, oh my God, you have a new single coming out. You're like, yeah.
We'll be happy when it's done.
Once it's done. Like once it's out, that's when you can celebrate. But all the stuff leading into it is just like once it's finally recorded, it's exciting. Like, because then you get to hear the final bit and you're like, all right, great, that's done. And then you just kind of like shrug and go, oh no, the next 2 weeks are gonna suck.
Is it the music making the hard part, or is it the aftermath of the promotion?
I think the music side is the fun part. I mean, because we write everything. We don't have a band behind us when we're rehearsing or anything like that. It's just the two of us. So the best part about creating everything is just not really knowing where it's going to go, and getting that experimenting done, and then having that finished product when everything's finally said and done is the really fun and exciting part, because it's the creative part really more than anything else. But I think once it's done and we hear that, like, we send it off to our engineer to mix and master it. Once it finally comes back and we hear, we're like, yes, it sounds so good. And, we listen to it a couple of times, and then it's just that slow wind down from like, oh my God, it sounds so good, to, oh, it sounds good. We actually have to like work on people hearing it now. This is so, the social part is easy, and we have, lots of great, the nice thing about our social following is that they're all really excited whenever we post that. So that part's easy. It's all the back end, and, getting the right people to hear it is the fun part, but it's also it's not that it's not fun. It's just, it's the,
you send it to like 100 people and like one person gets back to you. Yeah. No.
But it's all the marketing side of things that isn't quite as fun, right? Because it is very much all right, here's all the radio sends, here's the EPK, here's the radio send, here's the EPK. But the ones that we get lots of really great responses from a lot of the press outlets that we really like, and those are always the ones that know us by name and are really always looking for what we're about to do next. So it's, at the end of the day, it's worth it. It's always worth it. No matter what we're doing, it's always worth it.
It's play for you guys, right?
Exactly.
You're doing what you love. So.
Yeah.
What is behind you on the wall?
Behind, like, way back there?
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah.
So that's the playbill wall. So we're both huge musical theater lovers, and that's a collection of literally just every Broadway show that I've seen or that Nicole's seen at some point or another.
That is super cool. That you guys so neat. I love it.
It's like
just the poster of it, or is that the brochure? Or?
It's actually the program that we. It's good because if you ever want to like pop one open and like look at it, you'll see the original cast that we got to see with it, and it's funny like looking back on some shows that we've seen, like realizing, oh my God, like big name people that are now famous in the musical theater world were in bit parts when we saw these shows originally. So.
And you guys are both located in Toronto.
Yeah.
Toronto. Okay. Yeah, Calgary. For myself.
Nice. I've been to Calgary.
Have you? Yeah. Stampede?
No, actually, I was doing a theater tour, so I was just there for like 2 nights. But yeah, I've been around Alberta.
I think someone was telling me New York's actually ending their Phantom of the Opera. Is that true?
Yeah.
A lot of stuff is closing on Broadway. It's been rough.
But Phantom hurt. Phantom was one of those, like you have shows that have been around for 4, 5, 6 years that reach their end, and that's kind of a common thing. But Phantom was one of those, right? Phantom is like a staple. When
it's the longest running show on Broadway so far ever in history. So
for that one to close, that one, it was it. I don't know, when you hear I don't know, something like Dear Evan Hansen closing, you kind of go, yeah, okay, it was bound to close. But Phantom's just one that you expect it to just be there always, because it's a staple of New York. And that one hurt a little bit.
February they're closing it.
Yeah.
So I've never been to New York, and I've always wanted to see the Phantom of the Opera.
You should go.
You should go before it closes, just to experience it, because it'll tour and things like that, but it's not the same. Like getting to see it in its original theater the way it's meant to be seen is. Because if you don't go to see it in New York, now you have an excuse to go to London to go see it in on the West End, right?
I think it was 2007. I had seen Wicked in London.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Wicked.
That's a classic show. That's good.
Yeah, it is. Oh yeah. So the Phantom is worth checking out.
Yeah, it is one of those that over time, like it's slightly dated, but it doesn't matter just because the spectacle of it is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, it'll always be one of my favorite shows.
Well, his dog is named Phantom.
Yeah.
Oh.
After
Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Now I definitely have to go. So how did the two of you get started in this industry and obviously become a duo and spearhead Broadtree?
Well, we're a product of the pandemic, I guess you could say. We met doing theater. I mean, Armand's been doing music for way longer than me. You were in punk bands and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I did the whole high school, garage band thing and basement band thing, just because winters are cold. But I've had my experience touring and in a variety of different like pop and punk bands for a while, and then I think towards the end of I did some solo stuff for a while, and then I think on my second tour I'm like, okay, I think we're taking a break from music because it's especially when you're on your own, it's so much more work. You don't have co-writers, you don't have extra people helping you out. So I put that to the side, and then a year later I was missing the stage, and I was missing performing, and I was missing being creative, and I picked up my guitar. I'm like, nope, we're not doing this for a while. So I picked up back where I left off in high school. I'm like, let's jump on stage and into acting again. And that's where I got invigorated. Being back on stage was with theater, musical theater, and performing. And that's all. I'll pause there because that's where our stories slowly start to intersect. So I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. So I had never really done like this version of music, I guess. I fell in love with musical theater, and I moved here from Nova Scotia to sort of pursue that. So I went to school for musical theater, and then I was doing musicals around Toronto. And then we ended up in a show together, which was sort of a Star Wars spoof, which we like to mention because we're both dorks. So we met doing that on stage, and it was a show that actually got remounted a couple of times. So we got to do it, and we were always sort of part of the like main cast.
Yeah.
And then we did a show which is a two-hander show, just the two of us, that was a musical. And that was the first time that we ever like sang together. And the show was just the two of us. So we got to work like a lot.
Yeah,
I guess,
we were
together.
Rehearsing like 20 hours a week in that show.
Wow. Yeah. And so that happened, and a few years passed, and then the plague happened, and we didn't really have anything to do. And then he just messaged me one day and was like, hey, I'm thinking of recording a couple of songs, and I wanted one to be a duet. Do you want to come sing on this duet with me? So I had nothing else to do. So we got together, we recorded a Taylor Swift cover, and we released that on Spotify. And I was so excited because I've never had songs on Spotify or anything like that. So that was super cool for me. And then we recorded a couple more covers, and we thought like, hey, this is working out. Like, let's see if we can try writing something together. And here we are now.
Love it.
Yeah, I think things really clicked when we were doing this, and we're still doing this for fun, I think. But at the very beginning, it was very much a way for us to keep creative in the only way that we had, because we had no stage. You can't really, we could act in front of a webcam, but it's just not as fun. So music was kind of our way of staying creative. And I think the moment we said, why don't we try writing, just see where it goes, that's where things clicked. I think Nicole brought in, it was just a rough idea. She's like, I kind of had an idea for like this chorus, and within like seconds, it just clicked. We had a chorus done. I'm like, well, that was fast. And then we started writing. And I think within 6 weeks we had written something like 13 or 14 songs. We're like, we were originally going to write a single, and then we're like, we're going to write an EP. And then when we kind of plastered it all together, I'm like, I think we have an album. And so here we go. And within for like another 2 months later, it was out, which it was insane to think how quickly things moved at the very beginning, but
it was very whirlwind.
Yeah, it was very whirlwind.
And then is this your guys' full-time gigs now?
It's a part of it. I mean, I think we're both finally back in a world where, now that the world's opening up and now that kind of theater is back, we're finally both in a world where theater is back in our lives and performing is back in our lives permanently. So this is just, a part of that.
It is an element of performing. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So we have this, Nicole's acting, full-time as well. I'm doing a lot of theater management, and then I also have a separate a separate show that I run, which is a mentalism show. So, we're still keeping this, we still rehearse weekly, we still are writing, we're still like, this is still
Playing
very much
gigs,
a part of what, we're still
releasing a new song.
releasing a new song. And it's, I think one of the things that we learned is, I think in 2021, because we really didn't have all that much going on, and things moved at such a fast pace. When we were about to release this song, we kind of looked at it and we're like, this is our third release this year. It's
nice.
It's nice because when we counted last year we released 27 songs. When you kind of add up the album and like the covers and everything like that, we look back at it, we're like, what were we thinking? Like, it was just, and when we were, I would say, like, towards the end of the year, we were very much burnt out. Like, we got to tour, which I think was really, really cool in 2021, which
in a small break between lockdowns.
Yeah. We literally started the tour after, like, I think maybe 2 weeks after a lockdown had opened up, and then our tour ended, and then 3 days later everything shut down again. So we got like so lucky in the process of that. And I think when we went into this year, as we both started to have things open up and our opportunities come back, we weren't saying goodbye to this. We're still very much a part of it, but I think it was working a lot smarter versus hard.
Oh yeah. It's the same with the podcast. Started during the pandemic, right?
Yeah,
so just a way to communicate with people. I needed
exactly. And I think that was the really unique thing about starting this kind of a project during the plague. We like calling it the plague. It's just a much better name to it.
I love that name, actually. Great.
But for us, I think the thing that was unique is that, we weren't able to play gigs locally to promote ourselves. We weren't able to kind of, focus on local publications and things like that to get our names out there. So it was very, very much a social media driven project when we first started, which was great because, we had a global audience listening, which you don't usually get when you first start these things out.
So targeting differently, hashtagging differently.
Yeah. And it was really cool because like indie artists on, our primary one is Instagram and Facebook and things like that, especially during the pandemic when everyone was really focused on online stuff. We all sort of connected and we followed each other and we met these artists from all over the world. And now we have these connections. Like we wrote a song with a girl in England, and we had another one do from like across the pond, do piano on one of our tracks and stuff like that. Like it's crazy all the friends that we've made who are also artists, and there's like this little sort of group that all supports each other. It's great.
And you know what? They probably were looking for you as well, right? In the process. Yeah. Well, where did you guys come up with the name Broadtree?
That's all you.
So when we first started releasing covers and things like that out into the interwebs, we just gave ourselves a name, and his name's Armand, mine's Nicole. So we called ourselves A and N. But then when we were about to release the album, we started to go, we should probably get a better name, because that's actually really hard to find when you search it online or on streaming. It's like, because the ampersand doesn't count as a character, and A, like the letter A.
Well, A actually doesn't count as a character either, because it's A, the, like anything like that.
Yes, yeah.
Basically, like we were listed under N, like literally the letter N. Like if you downloaded one of our songs and you put it into the alphabetical order, it would just show up under N. So
it was not an ideal name. So when we decided to release the album, we were like, oh gosh, we should probably pick a better name. And I think I was probably sitting on the toilet or something like that. A lot of people, once we started putting our music out there, said, oh, well, you guys sound country, but you have like this musical theater sound too. And we were like, well, that makes sense, because those are both influences for us. And I thought, like, oh, Broadway plus country is Broadtree.
Oh, look at that.
Right?
Okay.
So
I
that's
like it. That's great.
But it's nice. It has a very country vibe. Like it has this sort of imagery of this nice big large tree, and it feels very like nature and grounded and stuff like that. But yeah, it really is just the Brangelina of band names.
I love it. And so Armand, are you from Toronto originally?
For the most part, I mean, I usually say that I'm Toronto based. I was born in Mexico. Yeah. We moved back and forth constantly between Mexico and then Brampton. So Brampton's mostly where I grew up. I think once we moved permanently to Canada, way back in the days where Brampton was still considered a small town. And then eventually, once that started to grow, and I, was working downtown a lot more, I made the move, and I've been downtown Toronto for about 10 years now. So it's home. It still is. It's still weird going back to Brampton and seeing the growth that it's had there. But Toronto's been my home for quite a while. And I mean, it's really hard when you're talking to people from anywhere outside of Canada, like, where are you from? Like, it's Toronto. It's just easier that way. Brampton's
Where are you
got
from?
nothing.
Vancouver in BC.
Oh no.
If you start saying like, "Oh, I'm from Prince Rupert or Prince,"
Yeah.
what are you talking
Yeah.
Okay, so I have something here. It says Broadtree is a pop country duo that has created a unique blend of stylized storytelling over a bed of catchy pop country with a subject matter that often breaks the norms of the genre. The duo openly supports several causes, speaking about racial equality, Canadian First Nation rights, the LGBTQ plus community, and keeping an open line to anyone wishing to discuss mental health and illness. How come that was a topic of choice and causes for you? State the
Well,
obvious, but come on.
yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of causes listed there. And for some reasons, because we come from some of these communities, and also just because, obviously a lot of our friends do, and we care very deeply about those things. But one of the biggest themes on our first album was mental health. And that's because that's something that we both live with. And it's not really, I mean, it's getting better, and that's actually something, I guess, semi-positive that came out of the plague, is a lot of people started to have a better understanding of what mental health is, and it got a little less scary to sort of come out and say, well, I feel like I've been depressed, I'm not okay, like I'm having a lot of anxiety. Like, people started to talk about things like that more. But then there's, of course, still a ton of stigma that, even though those things are starting to be more talked about and more accepted, there's still a ton of stigma about other mental illness, such as like bipolar and things like that. Like, someone's much more likely to come out and say like, oh, I have depression, or I'm depressed, than they are to say I'm bipolar. You know what I mean? And so a big theme on our album was sort of addressing and talking about that, which is not something you see, and you encounter it sometimes in rock and stuff, but not so often in country music.
Yeah.
What do you guys struggle with, if you don't mind me asking, in terms from a
We're very, I mean, we're both very open about our mental health. So I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder back in 2013. Originally it was bipolar, and then lots of psychiatrists argued, and then eventually KMH was like, here you go. I'm like, all right, great. So that was my diagnosis.
Yeah, and then I'm bipolar.
So we're very, I think we've both been in the position where it is sometimes very difficult to talk about that, to tell somebody without not necessarily knowing how they're going to react. It's one thing when you tell the people that are going to stand by you regardless, but when you tell a complete stranger, or if you're having a really rough time at work, something that for us is no different than, let's say, having the flu that knocks you out of work for 3 days. When you're going through something, and something that is an impactor as a result of your mental illness, it's very, very difficult to talk about, was very difficult to talk about, just because you don't really know the kind of perception that's going to give you. You don't know how people are going to look at you differently. Are people going to tiptoe around you? And it really doesn't change who you are. It's just something that you live with. But I think now we're in a position of, it's part of our lives. We know how to deal with it. We know what our diagnosis is. We know what it looks like. We know the good, we know the bad, and it doesn't really impact who we are. It's just, it just is. And for us, I think it's really important to get others to try to feel comfortable in that. Obviously, maybe not in the same way, but, to not necessarily be afraid of, the stigmas and the things that come with it. I mean, it's going to happen one way or another, but I think, most people, it's not necessarily a matter of coming out and being like, I'm manic depressive, or I'm bipolar, whatever the diagnosis may be. I think it's just being okay with whatever that label or that diagnosis is, and getting the help that you need. Because I think that's the hardest part, is so many people live with some of the challenges of depression, anxiety, or the full spectrum of mental illness, and it's just a small percentage that are able to actually go and say, things aren't okay, I need help. And our biggest thing is, that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay not to be okay. And like we said, in country music, that's not a very big popular theme. So if we could try to find a way to discuss that and talk about it, even if it's not necessarily directly in our music, but in open conversations, that's a big platform that we stand by.
But music is a great way to sort of connect with people about it too, because like we have written a few songs that are very obviously about that. And I think it's just such a, music is such a universal language, and somebody, you might come up to say to someone and say like, oh, I'm bipolar, and they might go, whoa, I don't know what that is. I don't get it. I don't understand. But you can talk about what that feels like in a song, and people can go, oh, I felt that. Like, I know what that feeling is. So it's a really great way to, I guess, make it less scary too.
Yeah. Well, it's so true. I mean, yeah, you're right. If you hear the word like anxiety, it's so different than someone came up to you and said bipolar, because you have, that initial thing is, well, do I have to watch what I say, or how do you deal with this? And and then there's when you don't know what to do, you kind of isolate, right? You put a person away, and whether that's a colleague, a friend, or whatever. Yeah. So true.
And it's a lot of the stigmas that, I think we grew up with. If we think of like movies and things like that, it's just those the representation of bipolar, or, schizophrenia, or psychosis, or any of these things that were just that are illnesses. Like that's literally all they are. Just have such a horrible name to them, right? And I think that's one of the hardest things to sometimes overcome. And you're right. I mean, they're scary terms for those that don't necessarily know what they are. But our biggest thing is, can we create awareness? Can we create a little bit of education and give people the resources that they need for it? Because that's, I think, the biggest thing.
And I love that you guys are shedding light on a topic that, again, like you said, has that stigma around it. Like, it's needed. Yeah, we're all normal. Yeah. So many of us suffer in silence, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's the worst thing about it, is that.
Well, and the stigmas make it hard for you to go get help yourself as well. Like, I remember, I grew up in a really small community and stuff like that. So, ideas take longer to change in tiny communities. I remember when I was first struggling, it took me so long to go get help, because to me, going to get help meant I was crazy, and I didn't want to think of myself that way. I didn't want to think. And a lot of people still have these ideas about like getting medication and stuff. They think, oh, it's going to make me a zombie. It's going to dull all my feelings, and that's so not the case anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so grateful that I finally decided, like, I've had enough of this. I need to get help. It changed my life.
Oh, yeah.
So it's, it's so important to let people know that it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because a lot of people hide their medication or are nervous, right? Like, oh.
Mm-hmm. Or are afraid to go there at all.
Yeah.
Like,
one thing the pandemic did is like kind of open us all up to saying is, yeah, you know what? We're all human beings. Now, going back to work and doing all these things, I'm so proud that you guys were able to go out there and have the courage to say, I have bipolar, I suffer with this. This is what I stand up for, because, we didn't do those things.
mm-hmm.
It's all under the rug. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think even if we did before, I think the empathy and the open ear to try to understand wasn't there. You throw the term, and like you said, it's that, whoa, okay, what do I like? How do I act around here? Like, the same way that you were acting 5 seconds ago. Like, it's cool.
Yeah.
But now I think people are just a little bit more open to, oh, well, okay, what does that actually mean? Like, what do you go through? And I think if there's 1 out of 100 people that's now more willing to listen to that, then great, all the better. I mean, that's 1%, but it's still a step forward.
Did you guys know that each one of you suffered with that?
Yeah, I mean, you've been really open for years on social media and stuff like that. I mean, so I kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said from the very beginning, I think for me it was, this is a part of who I am, and I'm not really gonna hide behind it, or hide it, just because I think it's also very important for people to understand that, just like any other illness, and that's I think one of our biggest thing, is that mental illness is no different than living with anything else that's chronic, like things like whether it's diabetes or whether it, like, having, some sort of episode, be it like a manic episode with bipolar, or like, some sort of attack with borderline, it's no different than a flare up on something else. It's just this is what happens. And I think that for me, it was always very important, especially the people that I was closest with, to be able to understand, here's the potential impact of what might happen if I'm going through, I'm going to use that from now on, a mental health flare up, mental illness flare up from now on. Because I think for anybody, I think it's very important for them to know, just like, here's what might happen, and here's how I need support. And I think that's an important conversation to have. But then I think,
I don't think so basically what happened, I'm not sure how much you knew beforehand, but I know when we started working together and writing songs and stuff like that, obviously, the plague has hit artists and performers so hard, and we were both just going through one of the hardest times in our life, and it was so bad. And of course, when that's what you're going through, that's what you write about. And so I think that very early on, we definitely had some big conversations about all of the hard things that we were going through. So pretty well as soon as we started working together, I think.
I mean, I think that goes well before Broadtree. And it's interesting, because I think when you're talking about mental illness, and it's almost something that brings you together, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but it's like, wait, borderline, bipolar, me too. And then, because then you have someone that you can actually share these experiences with and not be afraid to share them, because you can actually say, like, here's what I'm going through, and then have the other person go like, oh my God, yes, thank you.
Because so many people, normal friends or whatever, for lack of a better word, or family members or whatever it is in your life, you can talk about like, oh, like I feel like this, and talk about how you're feeling, and they'll be like, oh no, don't feel like that, it's okay, like it's fine, everything's gonna be good. And sometimes
take some Tylenol.
Take some Tylenol for it.
But sometimes that just doesn't help. You don't want somebody to say like, oh, you'll be fine. You want somebody to say like, I get it, I'm listening, like, I understand that that's hard for you. Like, instead of just being like, oh, don't worry, it'll all be okay. Sometimes you just need somebody who's just going to listen and be like, that sucks.
Yeah.
What is bipolar to you guys, and what do you guys go through as symptoms and such that we could share with others?
That's a big question. Well, I would say bipolar is kind of like, when things are good, it's like anything is possible. Like you're like on top of the world. And when things are bad, it's like nothing is possible, and you have no hope at all in life. So those are kind of the ups and downs. And obviously you don't feel like that constantly every day unless you're in a bad spot. But that's, And sometimes those things can last an hour, and it can be very roller coaster up and down, or sometimes it can last for months where you feel really down. Really
Isn't that life in general, though? The ups and downs, peaks and valleys of life.
It is, but there's something very overwhelming about it. And I mean, I'm generally pretty lucky, but I know that like sometimes for certain people that are bipolar, they'll have like, when they're having a manic episode, which is kind of sometimes feels good because you're very high and happy and excited and over the top, it involves making really bad decisions because you feel great. So you'll go spend all your money, or like, have a lot of, I've not done this, but, have a lot lot of like
promiscuous
sex
encounters.
Yeah. Promiscuous, thank you. That don't really think out, or you spend. I have done this. You spend a whole bunch of money because you're like, yeah, this is a great idea. Like I'm an actor. I got an opportunity that was probably a little sketchy to go to LA, but it cost me like $10,000, and I was like, yeah, of course, yeah, I'm gonna be a star. Right. You know, so your logic can get a little skewed and stuff like that.
Reality and perception.
Yeah, and I think the ups and downs are one thing, but I think one of the biggest challenges that you don't have full control over it, or you're not necessarily aware of kind of what's going on. I think when you're in that manic state, it's not like you can. It's very, very hard to have that out of body experience to look and be like, you need to calm down, like just don't spend 10 grand on this, or you don't have the outside body being like, you're in a low, this is going to get better. And I think one of the things that like on the therapy that I've gone through for borderline, it is a lot of that. It's being able to kind of work yourself out of these holes that you sometimes get. You don't dig for yourself, but you kind of do at some point or another. So
Can you
It's
like own up to that and just say, like, how does someone say, oh my God, don't spend that much money? How do you, like, is there a way to kind of keep a rational thought, but then without numbing yourself to the point where you just have no feeling? Like, is there a balance?
I mean, I can speak from, I mean, I've just, not just, it's weird to think that it was a year ago. I went through a pretty intense therapy program called DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And that's basically the therapy for BPD, for borderline personality disorder. And on, you know, whereas with bipolar, it's, you know, feeling ups and downs. The way to describe borderline is it's essentially feeling, imagine feeling absolutely every emotion, but amplify it to, you know, about 100 times more than what the average person would feel. So, you know, when something is great, it's unbelievably great. But when something hurts, it hurts more than anything you can possibly imagine. And like one of the articles that is very, very commonly known is that they describe borderline personality disorder as somebody essentially having the equivalent of like third degree burns, but emotionally. And it's a hard thing to deal with, right? Because you're constantly in that position of like, how do I deal with this? What do I do? And to be honest, therapy is kind of one of the things that, you know, I think we're both on the same page. We both firmly believe that it doesn't matter what you're going through, whether you're mentally ill or not, therapy is a very smart thing to do at some point or another. It makes a huge difference. And a lot of that is really coping. A lot of it is understanding, okay, well, you know, if I feel a manic episode coming on, or if I feel like I'm starting to spiral and I know where this is going, identifying it and having your own strategies to make sure that you don't end up there. So it's kind of almost like nipping in the bud before you actually get into those positions versus, and it takes time. I mean, early on in the days, and, you know, I would say up until maybe last year, I didn't know how to do that. And this therapy program has been like a life changer.
Yes, thank goodness.
And
yeah, it's so hard on yourself when you put yourself through hell, right? And you've seen darkness. It's hard, right? You don't ever want to go back there. It's they can take you down. Yeah. So, and then obviously with First Nations and Indigenous and racial equalities, how did that all come about for you guys?
First Nations rights is something that's, I mean, I think it really struck me really hard because in my history classes, I mean, you know, evidently a lot of new evidence has come to light in Canada, as you know, about residential schools and exactly how horrifying they were. But I personally, we never learned about that. Like a lot of people say, oh, we didn't learn much about it in history class. I didn't learn about it at all. I found out, same there. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like I found out about residential schools when I was 22 years old, sitting on a subway in Toronto, and I picked up a newspaper because it was sitting there and I had nothing to do. And it was the front page article, just somebody talking about this. And I just remember being absolutely flabbergasted and completely shocked that this was something that had happened. And the fact that the worst part was not like realizing, like, how could I not know about this and how infuriating that is. And I mean, again, growing up in a small town, like, I mean, I remember our little town, like we're a lot of communities in Canada are close to reserves and stuff. And I remember growing up being not taught per se, but like the general perception was, oh, the natives, which we used as a derogatory term, oh, they just can't get ahead because, you know, they're lazy drunks, and like just this whole terrible perception of like, they, you know, it was 200 years ago, get over it. And like, the reason you're not over it is because you're just lazy, like terrible, terrible things. And I literally believed that when I was little growing up, you know, and it's just.
And then I think with, you know, it is one of those where, you know, our awareness of it was there. And when, you know, things started to come out about all the, you know, the findings at residential schools and, you know, discovering these thousands of bodies of children. I mean, that it's infuriating, and it's infuriating when you know about it beforehand, but, you know, it's even more infuriating when, you know, we take such pride, like I don't know, Canada has this element of pride. No matter where we go, we're just so proud of being Canadian. And don't get me wrong, like I think I'm very proud of some of the things that our country has. I think that we have so much to offer, but then when you look at some of the things that are literally swept under the rug, for us as children growing up in school and aren't informed about some of the history that we had, that's the thing that really kind of, I think, sunk in. And even when we look at January 1st of last year, there were still people that were going, despite thousands of children being found, you still had people going, well, that was 200 years ago. And you're like, we need to have a conversation, because it's not about what happened then. It's about
what's happening
what's happening now, because this still exists. This is still a present thing. People are still living with this trauma. And if we're ignoring it, then we're not giving people the due respect and diligence. And this whole reconciliation thing that everybody keeps talking about, well, that's education is a big part of that. And for us, one of the our big thing on social media was having those conversations, because we would see people and we would get comments from people after we posted a video about it, just talking about stats and just talking about the educational side of things, saying, well, like, why is this so important if it happened so long ago? And it hurts when you hear stuff like that, because it's not fair. And you then realize, you're like, we have this image of what Canada is, and suddenly that image is taken away. And it's not a matter of, it doesn't erase some of the great things that we've built as a country, but it's built on this history that we're choosing to ignore. And I think that we can't really truly be great if we don't acknowledge and reconcile with the things that we've done in the past. And I think that's something that's really, really important to both of us.
And a lot of now that these discoveries have been made and it's becoming more part of the public awareness, there's so much talk. It's very much like the States always say, oh, thoughts and prayers. There's so much of that. And like, oh, look, I'm an ally because I forwarded this post and things like that. And for us, it's like, it's not just about saying sorry or feeling guilty or that sort of thing. Like, what can we do now to actually help? So we try to put that message out there a little bit too, about like, here are some actual things that you can do, or some actual issues that we can look at as a country to help the people who are living now in these communities and these people who are suffering now.
And for us, like something as simple as we wrote an email to our local council, just to start that conversation. And that turned into, this 3 hour, like she gave us 3 hours of her time to have conversations about, the things that we could start to look at in the community, and what her party and, the NDP party was doing. That's because she was a member of the NDP party. And it was very comforting to know that we at least had somebody in our community that we could have that dialogue with, right? And knowing that they're really they have that mentality, and that those words are coming out. And we've started to see some of those actions come to place, but we're still a long ways off. We're seeing baby steps happen, which is good to see. But I think that for us, the important thing is just making sure that education, it doesn't slip away. We had our first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, so how do we make sure that those conversations continue to happen?
Right. It's not just wear the orange shirt on that day and move
Exactly.
on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's what I talk about with Mental Health Day. Belle, let's talk. I think it's a great day.
Yeah. Thank you.
But it drives me crazy.
Or Mental Health Month, right? It's just, it's great. And we hope that people are able to come out and have those discussions, but it doesn't end on May 31st. It doesn't end, like, it doesn't start on May 1st. It's just like that. I mean, it's, Pride doesn't just happen in June. It's a year-round thing. So
I think it's a great reminder, right? In case someone's new, or, it's now their time of life or wherever they're at, and they say open to discussions, open to absorbing new things in their life. I think, whatever that occasion is, if it's the Reconciliation Day, if it's Mental Health Day, if it's Pride Month, Pride Week. Yeah, I don't know. Life is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I just, I think it was Kamloops. Wasn't that the first place that we heard about all this? Yeah. That was my first time hearing about all that. I had never heard of it. And I was, upset. I felt like shit for a second, because I thought, was I ignorant this whole time in my life? Like, did I not have a clue? Yeah. No one has brought that up in my entire life around me. So, and I moved from East Africa to Calgary at 4 months old. So I was really upset about that part. Yeah, we never gave people hope. Like, we already had a narrative in our heads. And
yeah, and I think when that's the common view that everybody around you has, it is very hard to ignore. It's really hard to just not, believe it, just because that's the narrative that everybody's spinning.
yeah.
And I mean, when that was your first time hearing about it, I mean, that's the general population of Canada was just hit really hard with this. Oh my God, like, how is this actually, like you said, how is this happening right under our noses and we didn't even know about it?
I mean, 1 or 2 children is bad enough.
Yeah, but thousands is just,
yeah. What do
But
you guys hope to see, though, out of all this? Like, what, some of the things that you would like to see? Okay, we have the Orange Shirt Day, we have the Reconciliation Day. What can we do for the future generations?
I think first of all, we need to actually listen to them. You know what I mean? Because like there's a lot of voices right now saying what, we should be doing. And I think that First Nations people, we still don't listen. It's the clean water thing that always comes up. They're saying this is what we need. And we go like, oh, but how about orange shirts and a day in class for you? And it's like, like your pipelines are destroying our homelands. This is what we need. And we're just like, we're going to say that our theater's on your land. Thank you very much. You know what I mean? Which is a start. It's something, but like they can tell us what they need. Like the big, that massive stabbing that just happened in Saskatchewan. And like,
James Carnation.
Yeah. And, they're saying like what we need is mental health assistance. We need, like therapists and it's just people are often focused on the wrong thing. And I think the main thing would be like, we got to listen to the people it's happening to.
Yeah. And I think as we build that in, I think education, building kids up right now with the education and knowledge that this is a part of our history. Listen, every single country has a stain. Like there's no country in the world that doesn't have a stain on its past, regardless of how incredible that country seems to be now. And I think
don't we all have wounds?
Agree, absolutely. But I think that, and that's the whole thing is that, but this is one that we've chosen to kind of, again, none of us knew, like a lot of people don't know. And shouldn't it be a part of our history at some point or another to say, like, here are some of the things that, before we became this great nation, that we weren't a great nation at one point or another, and we're still making waves with it. So I think, education to those that are finding out now, who are now adults, it is a little bit harder to kind of get to. But for the kids that are growing up in our society, when it comes to any of the things that you've mentioned that we're big advocates of, whether it is First Nations, right, whether it is the LGBTQ plus community, something as simple as introducing what homosexuality is as part of and heterosexuality in education. Like all of it comes down to making sure that these things that we're discovering now and these things that we're learning about and the damages that we've gone through. I mean, think about what somebody being gay looked like 20 years ago compared to what it is now. Yeah. People are still judged by it, but 20 years ago, calling someone gay was an insult, like that. You would say that to somebody to try to insult them.
Yeah, it wasn't used the way it is used now, right?
No, and now it's just, I feel like it's slowly, it's become a part of our everyday language, but that's because we've grown up with a bit of that education. We grew up through this period of watching it grow and watching it become the norm. And, I think that kids that are growing up in our country deserve to know that all of these things like mental illness should be taught no different than,
sports ed.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I think as far as, the big picture looks, it's, listening to what people need, but more importantly, also making sure that the education is there. If not for us, if not for the people that aren't going to try to actively seek it out, but to make sure that, our future generations at least know, because they're the ones that are going to be able to actively take part and do things in it.
What made you guys pick the LGBTQ plus community as a whole? And sorry, I just read somewhere that there's a 2 now on there. Is that LGBT?
Two-Spirit, I think, yeah. Which is actually an Indigenous thing. I think that's kind of one of their.
Is that what that? Okay, so it doesn't have to always be applied for it. It just if you're relating it to Indigenous, is that how?
Yeah, that's where the two spirit side, and honestly that LGBTQ plus, we kind of stop it there just because otherwise the letters go on and on and on and on. So we mean the community as a whole. So I'm bisexual. I only came out, and like this actually comes from last year. We wanted to write a song for Pride. We kind of said, like it is, we have so many friends that are in the community, and
we're actors.
We're actors. Yeah, that's kind of
all our friends.
And we wanted to write a song that was going to be a part of Pride, and we had a mentality what we were going to release and what it was going to sound like, and then with us living with mental illness and then BLM happening all around, and all of these different things that were happening in the world back in 2021, where it was hard to wake up in the morning and realize like things are awful right now. The world is a really crappy place right now. We released this song called Be As, and a video that went with it. And rather than it being focused on as an anthem for Pride, we tried to take pride as pride in anything that you are. So whether it is your sexuality, whether it's where you're from, your religion, whether you're a workaholic or a playaholic, whatever it may be, just taking pride in who you are, and to be, like our tagline in that song is "Be as proud as you want to," and that's
my shirt.
Yeah, that was our Pride shirt.
By the way, can you buy that shirt anywhere?
Yeah, it's on our merch store.
It's on our merch store.
Okay, I'm totally getting one.
I love it. Thank you.
And the tagline is literally on the shirt. It's "Be whatever you want to be." And be whatever you want to, and that was our big thing. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you do. Just be. And that kind of came out. It started off as something for Pride, and it turned into a little bit more. And you tell the story because I'm talking a lot.
Oh, what am I telling the story?
Well, I'm going to say like what happened maybe after we released the Pride single.
Oh my God. So after we released the Pride single, after we released Be As, we got messages almost immediately, like within the first few hours, within the first 24 hours of it being released, we were getting messages from complete strangers saying like, thank you so much. Like this song has, it was a big moment for me, like hearing this song. Like I now feel like I'm going to come out to my parents, or like, things like that. It was incredible.
And for somebody to tell you that, something that you created made them feel brave and confident enough to go and actually come out to their family. I mean, we almost cried. We probably cried because like, I mean, that's why we make art at the end of the day. We make art to try to make a difference. And if one person, if we walk away from this and one person walked away with being able to be themselves and have that conversation, I mean, what else could you really ask for? Like that to us is success.
Yeah, when you look at a metric, that's a metric right there.
Yeah. That's probably the biggest checkbox you can give. So I think that for us is a big part of it. I think, and bringing it all back, in the world of country music. None of this is talked about. And I think, when you look at the origins of where country comes from, it's probably part of the reason for it.
States and all
that. Pretty much.
Alabama.
But I think for us, we have this, we never thought that we would have a platform. We honestly never thought that this was going to go anywhere. We never thought that we'd be in this position where 2 years after starting, we'd be having interviews and conversations like this.
And I mean, we didn't set out to be like social justice warriors and politics
but the world forced us into that. Like I was never this guy that knew a lot of these things. Like I was like, this is just the way the world is. Right. I never cared about this stuff, but now you realize like what's right, what's wrong, what you stand up for, and enough is enough, right? Like I don't want to be pushed in this corner and believed this way, or this is hidden from me, like you said, the residential schools. I was upset that I didn't know that from social studies. Like we learned about Germany in World War II, or the fur trade in Thunder Bay, Hudson Bay.
Yeah. Well, that was my school. It was like, oh yeah, they used canoes. Like that's literally all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So true.
Oh man, but yeah, but then it's that thing, like especially in 2021, so many things were happening that we were like, this is too important. We have people listening. We have to say something.
Yeah.
I mean, the world has really opened its eyes for, I hope, the better.
And I think at the end of the day, the important thing is to continue that dialogue. And that's why, for us, it's continuously important to continue that conversation, to continue to speak about it, to make posts about it. It's not just about truth and current. Like whenever, we receive an email, because we still get emails from our local council saying, here's an update and here's something you guys might want to know. And we share that. Like, we're so happy to share stuff like that. Because for us, like it's a step forward. We may not have made that step, but it's important for us to share that so that other people know.
That's super interesting. Yeah, the world is definitely in a new spot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is the future bright?
I think so. We're making strides already. Like, as long as we don't allow it to be a flash in the pan, as long as we don't allow it to be like, oh, this is the vogue thing to talk about on Facebook or whatever right now, and then we move on to the next thing. Yeah, I think
I think, and you know what? I think the plague brought some really awful things about, but it also brought some really good things about. And I think that's because a lot of the times for the better part of 2020, we didn't have a choice but to sit down and listen. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things that you couldn't turn a blind eye to. And BLM was a big part of that. I mean, if you think back to what people, and I'm guilty of this, I remember in Toronto a couple of years ago, BLM stopped the Pride Parade. They, like, the biggest Pride Parade in North America, or I think the world for that matter, in Toronto, they formed a line and they stopped the Pride Parade and said, here's a list of the things that we want to see change. And at that time, I'm like, you're stopping you're stopping such an important day. Like, how dare you? And then when you sit back and you start to learn a lot more about BLM and just all the social injustices that they brought up in the last couple of years, I think back to that and go, yeah, I get, where else are you going to, like, if you're not being heard, at what point do you basically say, like, we need to take a stand? And if it means that we have to stop this to be heard, then we'll do it. Because there's only so much screaming that you can do before you actually have to take, a drastic action to it. So I think, we're finally in a place where we're able to listen. We're able to truly kind of, I think, try to understand. And I think that's something that's positive that's come out of the pandemic, I think, is that people are able to focus and understand and learn a little bit more about what they stand for and what they believe in and the things that they're educated on, be able to stop those conversations from happening or jump in if they hear something that's incorrect. And I think that's one of the key things. I've heard more and more people, if somebody makes a comment that, again, we almost kind of just take in stride as just like, it could be a racial term or whatever the case may be. But just being able to jump in and being like, it's not okay to say that. Like, and most people don't necessarily realize why until they're educated on it. And I think that's one of the key things that, we don't talk about. I'll use an example. And this happened before the pandemic. This happened, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. The term, like, being gypped, being ripped off, and we use that term, being gypped, a lot. And I used to use it all the time until somebody says, do you know where that term is from? And I'm like, well, no, I just thought it was a term. And it was the gypsy. Yeah, it was the idea of basically a gypsy not being paid, and that's where that term came from. And but as soon as I heard that, I was like, that's awful. Like, why are we using this as, and he's like, and he explained to me the whole reason and how it became a term, but I'm like, we're still, like, how are we still using that? And he's like, because it's a part of everyday culture. And, all I can really do is explain it when I heard it. And great, guess what? I've probably had that conversation at least 10 to 15 times since I first understood it. And if 10 to 15 people have now heard that and have stopped using that, I mean, that's a step in the right direction. If one person can make that little tiny bit of an impact, then
if you times that by how many, right?
Exactly.
That's how things move. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I also spend a lot of time with people from younger generations, or the next coming generation, I guess. And I think, as questionable as the internet's massive presence in their life is sometimes, I think it's also amazing for them to have access to so much information and so many different opinions. Like I said before, coming from a small town, things are changing there so much faster now because kids are growing up with access to all of this stuff. And the younger generations are almost, you know, we kind of tease them a little bit for like this cancel culture and stuff like that, but they're almost so aware of all these different, you know, things that are going on in the world that I honestly have a great deal of hope in them. Yeah. I think they've got the right idea. They're on the right track. And I think it's going to be good.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think people look at, you know, people get into this mentality of like, oh, cancel culture has become this negative thing. And I'm like, well, you know, you can look at it any way you want, but the whole point of somebody getting canceled, I think it's weird that that's a verb now. I think the biggest thing behind all that is really just, okay, forget about this person for a second, but what's the reasoning behind it? Mm-hmm. And if that's the conversation that we're having, then great, that's where we need to start. Yeah. You know, I think I'll use Harry Potter as an example. There are so many, like the Harry Potter audience out there is millions and millions and tens of millions of people. And, you know, when you look at the author of Harry Potter coming out as a transphobic person over and over and doubling down on it, I mean, the amount of people that really just stirred away from that culture altogether and not, you know, still believe in the magic and still want to take part in that, but know that they need to separate the author from the books because, you know, that was, I mean, I wrestled with that quite a bit when I mean,
we're both like a musician, right? There's songs you may like, but I know a guy that I really don't like personally. That's a musician or as a person. I don't like him as a person, but I like his music. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, you know, at what point do you separate the art from the artist? But I still think that, you know, the conversation we're having about why this artist as a person is being, I think those are the conversations that we really need to have.
Yeah. And young people are thinking about that, which is great. That's where this whole, I mean, sometimes it gets over the top, but that's where this whole cancel culture comes from, is they're thinking about, wow, I think that's wrong. And I think that that's important. Okay.
That's devoted to truth and reconciliation. That's a huge step.
I hope that does happen though.
Yeah. And I think that
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, it's a matter of getting the right people to be behind that. I think that, you know, it's hit a couple different generations that have that control and have that power, and, you know, only time will tell. But I think the one thing that I think about we're a little bit better in Canada about is making those changes if they need to happen. And, you know, that idea of thoughts and prayers is something that's infuriating to us more than any other country. So
that happens all the time.
Yeah, I mean, like
it's so phony now. You can just like whatever. It's just
exactly, and I think that, and I don't think that we stand for it. I think that's one of the important things about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Fun. Yeah.
So much.